The frigid November wind clawed at Eleanor Vance, a persistent thief trying to steal what little warmth her threadbare coat offered. It was a familiar battle, one she fought every month on the long walk home after cashing her meager Social Security check. This month, the check felt even lighter, the paper it was printed on barely substantial enough to represent the sum that was supposed to see her through. It was laughably small, a pittance meant to cover her groceries, her utilities, and, most pressingly, the heating oil that would keep the biting cold at bay. Tonight, the tank was empty, and the $5 bill tucked safely in her worn leather wallet was its only hope. As she trudged along the shoulder of the desolate two-lane highway, her mind drifted to warmer times. She pictured her husband, Arthur, his strong hands expertly stoking the fireplace, his laughter a comforting rumble that filled their small home. She thought of her son, Thomas, his bright, energetic presence a sunbeam that had vanished far too soon. Now, the house was just a house, a collection of memories held together by aging timber and peeling paint, and the only rumbles were the groans of the old structure settling into a lonely decay. A sudden, jarring sputter from up ahead broke her reverie. A motorcycle, a magnificent beast of chrome and black steel, coughed, choked, and then died, coasting to a silent, undignified stop on the gravel shoulder. The rider, a young man clad head to toe in heavy black leather, swung a leg over and slammed his booted foot onto the pavement with a curse that was swallowed by the wind. He kicked at the tire, then stalked around the silent machine, his frustration a palpable aura. Eleanor's first instinct was to hurry past, to make herself small and invisible as she always did. A lone woman of her age, a formidable-looking man in distress, it was a combination that common sense warned against. Yet, as she drew closer, she saw not a menace, but a boy. He couldn't have been much older than Thomas would have been. Beneath the tough exterior, she saw the slump of his shoulders, the exhaustion in the way he ran a hand through his hair after pulling off his helmet. He looked lost. Her heart, a foolish and tender thing, gave a painful squeeze. It whispered a dangerous idea, a notion that defied all logic and self-preservation. Help him. She slowed her pace, her worn boots crunching softly on the gravel. The biker looked up, his eyes narrowed with suspicion as she approached. "Everything all right, young man?" she asked, her voice thin but steady against the wind. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Just peachy, ma'am. Ran out of gas like an idiot. Nearest station is miles from here." Eleanor glanced at his powerful, intricate motorcycle, then back at his face, which was etched with a weary anxiety. She saw the ghost of her own son in his tired eyes. The $5 bill in her wallet felt like a burning coal. It was her heat for the night. It was her safety. But in that moment, seeing this stranger's predicament, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like a test. "Here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She had fumbled with the clasp of her wallet and was now holding out the single, crisp bill. Her hand trembled, partly from the cold, partly from the magnitude of what she was doing. "It isn't very much, but it should be enough to get you a gallon or two." The biker, whose name was Jax, stared at the money and then at her, his guarded expression melting into sheer disbelief. "Ma'am, no. I can't possibly take that from you." His gaze flickered to her thin coat, her worn shoes, the deep lines of hardship etched around her kind eyes. He knew, with a certainty that shamed him, that this was likely all she had. Eleanor pushed the bill gently toward his gloved hand. "Please. You look like you could be someone's son," she said, a soft, sad smile touching her lips. "If my Thomas were still with us, and he found himself stranded on a cold day like this, I would pray that a kind soul would find him." The name, Thomas, hung in the air between them. Jack saw the flicker of profound loss in her eyes and felt his own throat tighten. The pride that had made him initially refuse her offer crumbled into dust. He was a member of the Road Guardians, a motorcycle club that prided itself on self-sufficiency and strength. They didn't take handouts. But this wasn't a handout, it felt like something sacred. After a long, silent moment, his fingers, trembling slightly, closed around the $5. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Thank you, ma'am. I will pay you back. I swear it. What's your address? She shook her head, pulling her coat tighter. The wind seemed to bite a little deeper now that her wallet was empty. That's not necessary. Just do me a favor. When you see someone else in need, you help them. That will be payment enough. He nodded slowly, his gaze locked on her face, trying to memorize every detail. You got it, he promised, his voice low and earnest. He watched as she gave him a final, small smile and continued her slow walk down the highway, a frail figure battling against the vast, indifferent landscape. Jax filled a small canister with gas, the engine roared back to life with a thunderous rumble, and he sped off toward the horizon. But as the miles dissolved behind him, he couldn't shake the image of the old woman's quiet sacrifice. The $5 bill had felt heavier than a brick of gold in his hand. That night, Eleanor's small house was a tomb of cold. The silence was broken only by the rattling of window panes and the chattering of her own teeth. She piled every blanket she owned onto her bed, creating a lumpy, inadequate fortress against the encroaching chill. Huddled in the dark, she whispered a small prayer, not for herself, but for the young biker, hoping he had made it home safe and warm. She felt a pang of foolishness, a deep ache of vulnerability. But beneath it, there was a tiny, resilient spark of peace. She had done the right thing. She didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, that this single, simple act of kindness was about to ignite a wildfire. The next morning, Eleanor was awakened not by the pale winter sun, but by a sound. It started as a low, deep vibration that she felt in the floorboards, in the very marrow of her bones. It grew steadily, a distant hum escalating into a rolling, percussive growl, like a gathering thunderstorm. But the sky outside her window was a clear, brilliant blue. Confused and a little frightened, she shuffled to the front window, her heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pulled back the thin curtain. Her jaw dropped. The entire street, from one end to the other, was occupied. Lined up in perfect, gleaming rows were dozens upon dozens of motorcycles. They were a breathtaking sight, a sea of polished chrome, custom paint, and black leather, their engines idling in a powerful, synchronized symphony of steel. There had to be 75 of them. Men and women of all ages, all clad in leather vests bearing the same patch, a stylized eagle clutching a wrench and a heart, stood beside their machines, their faces turned toward her little house. And there, at the very front, standing beside the same bike from the day before, was the young man she had helped. Jax. He removed his helmet, his face breaking into a wide, warm smile as he saw her in the window. "Morning, Miss Eleanor," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the collective rumble. "I told you I'd be back." Hesitantly, wrapping her robe tightly around herself, Eleanor unlatched the door and stepped out onto her rickety porch. The sheer number of people, the overwhelming power of their presence, made her dizzy. "Oh, my goodness," she breathed, her hand flying to her chest. What is all this?" Jax's grin widened. He took a few steps toward her porch. "I went back to my club last night, ma'am. I told the guys what you did for me. How you gave a complete stranger your last $5 and didn't ask for anything in return." He gestured back at the crowd of bikers who watched her with expressions of profound respect. "These men and women, they're my family. And when our family hears a story like that, we don't just sit on it. We knew we had to do something." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, blurring the incredible scene before her. She couldn't comprehend it. A woman with fiery red hair and a kind smile detached herself from the group and walked toward the porch. She was holding a small, ornate box. "My name is Scarlett," she said, her voice gentle. She opened the box and held it out to Eleanor. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single, shiny key. "This is for you." Eleanor stared at the key, then back at Scarlett, utterly bewildered. "A key? What is this for?" It was Jax who answered, his voice ringing with pride. "Your new home, ma'am." Eleanor's knees felt weak, and she gripped the porch railing for support. My what?" she stammered, convinced she was dreaming. Jax nodded, his expression earnest. "We did some asking around last night. We found out your roof is failing, your heater's been broken for years, and you've been barely scraping by. That didn't sit right with us. Not after what you did." He explained how every rider had pitched in, how their club president had called in favors with local suppliers and contractors, many of whom were former members or friends of the club. "We pulled a collection, but more than that, everyone gave their time. We've been busy." He pointed down the street, past the last motorcycle in the long, impressive line. There, at the end of the block where an overgrown, vacant lot had sat for years, stood a house. It was a small, perfect-looking cottage, freshly painted a cheerful buttercup yellow with crisp white trim. A wide, welcoming porch featured a brand-new swing, and instead of steps, a sturdy, gently sloping ramp led up to the front door. The yard was neat, with small garden boxes already filled with hardy winter pansies. "That's yours, Miss Eleanor," Jax said softly. "Bought and paid for. Everything. It's all yours." A sob escaped Eleanor's lips. Her hand, shaking uncontrollably, went to her mouth. I can't," she whispered, the tears now streaming freely down her weathered cheeks. "I don't deserve this. I did nothing." Jax stepped onto the bottom step of her old porch, his eyes shining with an intensity that reached deep into her soul. "You deserve the entire world, ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught 75 hard-headed, cynical people that there's still real, unconditional goodness out there. You reminded us that one small act of kindness can start a wildfire." As if on cue, a cheer erupted from the assembled bikers. In a thunderous, celebratory roar, they revved their engines, the sound washing over the quiet neighborhood not as a threat, but as a wave of pure energy and warmth. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to emerge from their houses, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe as they witnessed the scene unfolding. "I only gave you $5, Eleanor whispered through her tears, the absurdity of it all overwhelming her. "And you got 75 hearts in return," Jax replied gently. "That's the beautiful, crazy math of kindness." Slowly, as if in a trance, Eleanor descended her broken steps and began to walk toward her new home. The bikers parted for her, creating a path. Many of them nodded, their tough exteriors cracking into genuine smiles. Some reached out to pat her shoulder as she passed. She walked down the street, her steps feeling lighter than they had in decades, her mind reeling with disbelief. She reached the cottage and placed a trembling hand on the smooth, freshly painted wood of the porch railing. She breathed in the scent of new lumber and fresh soil. She turned and looked back at the sea of leather and chrome, at the crowd of strangers who had become her saviors, all of them watching her with proud, happy smiles. Raising a frail hand in a gesture of profound gratitude, she called out, her voice trembling but clear, "Thank you. All of you. You've given me so much more than a house. You've given me back my hope." The bikers answered with one last, deafening salute from their engines, a chorus of gratitude that echoed off the houses and shook the very air. Then, with the grace of a flock of migrating birds, they turned and began to ride away, their thunderous sound fading into the distance until all that was left was a peaceful quiet. Eleanor stood on her new porch, the key clutched in her hand. Later, she would discover a pantry stocked to the brim, a closet full of new, warm clothes, and a heating system that filled every corner of the house with a gentle, enveloping warmth. But for now, she simply stood there, watching the last of the riders disappear over the horizon. She sank onto the porch swing, which swayed gently beneath her. A soft smile touched her lips as she looked up at the clear blue sky. "Well, Arthur," she whispered to the quiet air, a single, happy tear tracing a path down her cheek. "It seems the world is still full of good people after all, in a world that so often feels cold and unforgiving, a simple $5 act of compassion had lit a fire, a blaze of humanity that had warmed not just one heart, but nearly 100. Because sometimes, the smallest, most illogical act of goodness can become the biggest, most beautiful miracle.